Welcome to Daggers, the show where people that I like and appreciate and respect come on to yell at me about how dumb my takes are. And as the big news this week has been the firing of Taylor Jenkins in Memphis, and my feelings are on one side of a line. On the other side is most of Grizzlies fandom. I decided I would have two of my favorite people in the Grizzlies universe on to enlighten me as to why I'm wrong. Joining me are Joe Mullinax from Locked On Grizzlies and Grizz Lead. Check out his show daily on the Locked On Podcast Network. Also joining me, Molly Morrison, content at Bleacher Report. You can check her out on Twitter as well. If you're not already, what are you doing? You got to be following these folks on Twitter. They're awesome. So go ahead and do that. Today's show, we will talk about the Taylor Jenkins situation, and we'll hopefully end with a simple question of just exactly how screwed are the Memphis Grizzlies, because, well, the vibes are not great. The optimism is not high at this current moment in time. I watched a video from Molly that broke down her thoughts on the firing of Taylor Jenkins. I listened to Joe Mullinax and on Locked On Grizzlies and his explanation of why Taylor Jenkins got fired, and I find them wanting. I am not impressed with the two of you. That's not true. They were very good takes, but I want to debate them. So there's a bunch of components to this. Molly, I'll start with you.
Yes.
There's like the defensive slide since January, and then there's like Desmond and Santi getting into an argument on the sideline, and then there's like the record versus the bad or the good teams, and there's all these types, and there's like the general vibes suck. What if I boiled it down and was like, you got to choose one? You can choose, like, the whole array is important, but if you had to pick one, what's the biggest reason you think that Taylor got fired?
Well, first, to backtrack on the video I did post, I was literally like working and I had to go on lunch break and I had to put my phone up and record this video. No notes, no thoughts. I would have said other things and changed some things if I had actually put thought into it. But like I said, it was a very instant reaction. I did not expect so many people to watch it. I stand by everything I said, but I would have probably added a few things or, anyway. What it boils down to, I don't think you can do that. I don't feel as though this is a move that boils down to one thing. What it boils down to is that it needed to happen, and it was going to happen when the Grizzlies got eliminated after the first round. In this case, why don't you just do it now, see what happens? I mean, I feel like it just is a combination of so many things. Joe, is there one thing you can pin it to? Because I don't think you can.
I agree with you completely. For me, though, if I had to pick one thing that made me turn on him, because it definitely was a heel turn for.
Yeah,
there's a lot of supporters of Taylor Jenkins. I feel like I was one of the maximum supporters of Taylor Jenkins. That's in the Memphis sphere. You're unique, Matt, and Matt and I, for those that don't know, Matt was one of the original people that kind of supported my work all the way back in 2013, 2014. Matt was one of the first big media folks that gave me some shine. So thank you for that all these years later. I consider you a friend. I do believe that we're in a position with this team that you're in a spot that you see them more than most, if not all, national media folks, which is legitimately true. And I'll give you that backing. I listen to you about the Grizzlies more than I listen to most national attentioned NBA people. But at the same time, you're not in the thick of it in terms of social media. You're not in the thick of it in terms of, the conversations that I have on a daily basis. I'm sure Molly does as well, if not more people talking with Molly. The build up to this started last summer. And I know you've talked about that before, having a vast section of your assistants replaced. DeMichael and I talked about it on Locked On Grizzlies. Like, he's on the hot seat. Like that doesn't happen if you're in a good place with your bosses. And then as time has gone on, he lost me with the defense regressing, because even last season when they were really bad, right? They had the 9th pick in the lottery for a reason. Even in that year, they were 13th defensively. And since January 1st, I believe they're now 20th in the NBA defensively. That's not good enough. That is something that you used to be able to hang your hat on when everything else went to hell. You were able to say that you were a really good defensive basketball team, or at least an above average defensive basketball team. And that's not the case anymore. And for me, it's more about Isolo than it is about Jenkins at this point. I think they wanted to give him a test run. I'm not saying I agree with it, Matt. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm thinking that guy is the front runner for this. And it was decided, let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
And I agree with Molly. I think that it was going to happen anyway. Why be in this awkward lame duck situation?
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily agreeing because I don't know that I buy into Isolo yet either, but I have a feeling it has more to do with that than it does Jenkins' shortcomings to do it now.
Yeah, and I think it's confusing because Taylor Jenkins is a good coach. Like, no one's saying that Taylor Jenkins is not a good coach, but he was not going to be the coach to take this team to the next level. I've been on that wave for a little longer, not publicly necessarily, but it's just the Grizzlies were and are, obviously our stars are on the fringe of young, but a young team. He was a first-time coach. I think they all really like him. I think he's a great guy. And they've got something great going on. He helped, the stars find their place in the league. But I don't feel like he was going to be the coach to push them to that next level. And that's just what it boils down to me.
So what I like about this is because when I've done these shows, I find something kind of interesting to peel out of the conversation as a broader one. And one of the things I like about this is, okay, so Molly's point is that it was all these types of things. And Joe agrees. It was all these types of things. I guess like an interesting question here is, did it require all of those things simultaneously? So my question here is, let's say that the record fell off. The record against good teams was bad. You still felt like he wasn't going to be the guy to take them to the next level, which I don't know. Like sometimes you don't know that until it happens. Like I can tell you Nuggets fans were like, Michael Malone will never be the guy to take them to the title. Oh, and like it happens.
Right.
But if one of those things hadn't occurred, if the defense hadn't fallen off of a cliff, if they dropped to 15th, which by the way, month by month, they were about 16th. It was like the broader sample was bigger, but it was like, if you take it month by month, it wasn't like they were bottom of the barrel. It was just like, oh, this sustained stretch where some teams would play better and some teams would play worse. If you take out one of those elements, if they had a good record versus teams over 500, if they had a better defensive profile over the last 2 months, if they hadn't just slid in terms of performance, Joe, do you feel like would you have felt keeping him was the correct move? Would you have objected to the firing? Like, what did it take this specific combination of things to get you there?
It took the defense falling off. And again, I watch it almost every day.
Sure.
Right. I see the wide open threes from guys that aren't Steph Curry. Right. You get cooked by Steph Curry. Just about everybody in the NBA has been cooked by Steph Curry. Like everybody getting beat by Jokic. Right. Like, oh, man, you had a terrible outing against Nikola Jokic. So did the other 29 teams in the league. There are some guys that are just phenomenal. But you get tired of watching random role players like Rui Hachimura fillet you. Right? You get tired of seeing the lack of in-game adjustment defensively, the stubbornness of that. And that comes from the Budenholzer coaching tree. I know you know that, Matt and Molly as well. Like the reality of, okay, this is a problem, let's fix it. But there is no fixing it. It doesn't get fixed.
Right.
And they try things outside of the game. I didn't see enough in-game adjustment defensively. The rotations were maddening for people. They didn't bother me as much as they bothered other people. But for me, it was just the very clear – they're not on the same page anymore. You know, the fact that they draft Zach Edey, who I know you have very strong feelings about, they draft Zach Edey 9th overall, the exact opposite of what they're trying to do offensively. He just was, right? So whether or not Zach Edey is a good NBA player moving forward, this could be a topic for another episode of Daggers down the road. But for me, that was a very clear, they're not on the same page, if that makes sense. And instead of letting it kind of fester and boil and become a bigger thing, Kleiman made the decision to rip off the Band-Aid now. And I think that it's, again, is it the right decision? The timing throws me off.
Yeah.
But if he was going to be fired anyway, if he was a dead man walking, at the end of it all, if you're going to get to the same results regardless, what difference does it make when it's done?
Yeah,
I think that's where he landed.
I actually don't like. Everyone's kind of been like, well, it's not firing him, it's the timing. And I'm kind of like, if you know it's time, it's time. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like, it honestly doesn't matter. It would be unfair to fire a coach in the middle of a playoff series because of the message it sends to the players, right? But like, I'll just say, like, I don't really care what the Grizzlies players do from here on out because you've already sent them the message. If you had fired him if you had fired him at All-Star, if you'd fired him on January 1, if you'd fired him on April 1st, any period here, you have informed the players, yeah, this is not happening for us this year. Like they know that. Players know that. Players know that when a coach gets fired, it's like, oh, we're not. That's it. Pack it up. Like we'll do the work. We'll try and improve. We'll try and do the best we can. We'll most importantly hit our bonuses. But like, come on. Like we know the deal. Like if we were good enough, they wouldn't have fired the coach. And there's no real feeling of that. Molly on the defensive side, like he kind of mentioned, like leaving the 3-point shooters open and kind of things like that.
Yeah.
I don't have a good explanation for what the fuck happened for this really good defense to do this. And that's one where even I start to run into problems of like defending Taylor, because to me, it's like, if you can't explain it and it's not tactical and it's not roster, it's buy-in.
Exactly.
And then I don't really have a way to defend them.
Exactly. I was literally about to say, it's all about having command, having control, and having the players buy in. And that's what's not happening. And it hasn't been happening for years. Like Joe's saying that this defensive fall off is really a catalyst for why he was like, all right, I'm finally on that side. But for me, like, I do look at off court things, and I look at the way that this team, yes, of course you can point to injuries in the last few years. That was horrible. That was unfortunate. But all of these things happening off the court within the Lakers series, Ja Morant, just what he was going through, of course, because of a lot of his own actions, but with all of the stuff, even we're seeing today, Dylan Brooks, I mentioned in my video, all of these things, the way he's going and saying, I don't care, he's old, he's shooting us out of games, he's on the floor. Like, to me, a coach that really has control of the locker room is not allowing those things to happen. And he's not allowing things to get so bad to where Dylan Brooks is not being brought back under any circumstances. Like, that's how bad things got. Yeah. And I just feel like that showed that a coach is not, of course you have to blame players, but at a certain point, it is the coach who is leading this team, right? And then, there are a lot of front office things that we will get into, because I feel like both Joe and I probably have more to say about the roster and front office than we do negative about Taylor. But even Zach Edey, when Joe's talking about him, I hate the way he's been used this year. And I don't hate that draft pick. Again, front office wise, we now have a rookie center who is supposed to lead a playoff team at that position. We don't have other guys like him. We don't have a strong, backup center. Of course, we have some guys that swing in and out of positions, whatever. But Zach Edey, the whole season, he would start and then he got taken out of the starting lineup and then he would just sort of disappear. He wasn't tested. He wasn't put in the game in these late situations much, seeing what could happen. Of course, there was the issues with the lack of pick and roll and, with Steven Adams and Ja, that was so beautiful. And that was such a proponent for why the Grizzlies found so much success. And of course, right now, because he's a rookie, it's a lot to ask, like, hey, go be Steven Adams this year in your rookie year. But at the same time, how are you not prioritizing that? Why is John Conchar seeing the floor and all of these nights? Why are there 12 guys playing in games? Like, even in the last few games we've lost, truly, with the new coach, truly, we would have lost them anyways. And I don't think they would have even been close. Like, that's how strongly I feel that there was no cohesion. There was no sense of confidence. There was no buy-in to the offense, to the defense. It just wasn't clicking. And yeah, you have to look at a coach. That's not the end of the problems. Of course, the front office is now in the microscope and they've been in the microscope. No fans that are like, oh, we should have gotten rid of Taylor question that. But it's just about the fact that it wasn't working. He was not proving to be a solid leader for a team that has had a lot of road bumps. It wasn't there on the court, off the court. Yeah.
So I've struggled with this because I think I would have been where you guys are back in like 2015. And the 10 years since, having covered the league for this long and covered different organizations, not just in Denver, but like Oklahoma City, and gotten perspectives from people that have had jobs and lost them. One of the things that's really kind of struck me is there is a narrative idea of sports that we carry to the NBA, which doesn't apply. And like the idea is like the coach is a leader of men and he is the one that directs things. And he is the one that sets the buck stops here. And in reality, it's like, fuck you, man. I make more money and my job's guaranteed and yours is not. Whatever. I do what I want. That's like the life. And that's why so many executives have told me, and like, look, executives have their own biases that they bring to these conversations, but they've brought in the idea of your culture and your buy-in is set by the performance of your best player. Now, I don't know whether to blame Ja for that because Jaren's been the best player this season. And I think Jaren actually has acquitted himself very well in terms of like Jaren's a professional. That was my big takeaway from the Lakers series 2 years ago was like, while Ja and Dylan were losing their minds, I've got Desmond and Jaren talking to the media, taking responsibility, got to be better, playing within these kind of confines. And so I don't know where to like hold the accountability of buy-in really appropriately, because I think I'm not saying it's wrong, Molly. It's like, you could be right that it's just like, no, you got to do this, because the counterexample is like, does this happen with Houston with Ime Udoka? That doesn't happen there.
Look at Cleveland. You know what I mean? Like they were really good. They made a head coaching change, even though, you know, things were going well, and look how far they've come. I'm not saying that's going to happen to the Grizzlies, but I do just feel like there is a sense of look at the roster and look at who is the person that's going to best complement them. You know, who is the personality that's going to best lead them, right? Like when you do have these guys who haven't really had that experience in the playoffs, right? Of course, they've had some, but most of them haven't, and they have not had those battles. Maybe you have to look and say, okay, is there a different coach? Like, yes, coaching isn't everything, and I do feel like I understand what you're saying, but for me, the coach is the leader, and like the coach is the person that is making sure that things are clicking off the court and on the court. Like that does fall on the coach. It also falls on the fact that there aren't veterans on the team. I think John Conchar is our oldest player, which is absolutely absurd. But it's just yeah, I truly feel like it made complete sense to get rid of him.
So let's talk about the front office, because Molly mentioned you guys kind of got thoughts on that. I'll give like the 30-second dissertation about my Zach Edey position. I don't mind drafting Zach Edey. I don't mind firing Taylor's assistants and bringing in your own staff. That happens from time to time. You're right, Joe, that is a warning sign of a guy's position. I don't think it necessarily sets him up for success, but overall, it's like it can be fine. Like that this stuff happens, you know, and you can kind of get through it. Being like, we're going to bring in two guys and they're both want to run fast-paced, high-tempo offense. And on the other side, we're going to draft the plottingest plotter, whoever plotted up the plotting court. And we're going to say that he's the difference maker. A rookie center in the 2025 NBA is the difference maker for a team pursuing a championship. These things do not make sense, Joe. Those things do not go together. Like, you could be like, we believe in Zach Edey. We think he's going to be a franchise player for us. Cool. I don't agree, but I could be wrong. We'll see what happens. You could be like, we need a fast tempo offense. We need to counter program and do something extreme to be different from the rest of the league. Okay. I have some skepticism because doing that's really exhausting, which is part of the reason I think the defense fell off. And we saw that, I thought, last night in the game versus the Warriors. Okay. But you can't do both. You can't be like, we're going to do this and that. And then also, LaRoche was your hire. He doesn't want to run pick and roll. You're mad because Zach Edey's not playing enough because they're playing a system where he does not make any sense on the court, Joe.
I think that, and again, I have no inside knowledge on this, just my read of the organization. Everybody likes Taylor Jenkins, right? Like, I think this is not a firing where people are saying that Taylor Jenkins is a bad person or that Taylor Jenkins is a bad coach. Like Molly said earlier, I anticipate him to get another head coaching job in the next month or two. Like, I don't think I would, anybody in Memphis that's rational would be surprised if that occurred. It's one of those things where the disconnect occurs in personnel and coaching, and they tried to keep it all simpatico, and you're throwing stuff at the wall at some point and seeing if it sticks, trying to make it work because you like Taylor Jenkins and you appreciate the relationships that he built. You know, one of the things I've talked about regarding Jenkins in the past is, you know, with George Floyd's murder, right? During COVID, Jenkins was the head coach. All of these different seminal beyond basketball things occur. And Jenkins made purposeful efforts to engage with his players and have important conversations. I truly believe that nobody wanted to see him go, but they knew change had to occur. The only problem that Zach Kleiman and company ran into is they tried to make changes without the buy-in of the head coach. And is there a world where you could have merged Zach Edey with this high tempo offense, yes, I think there is a world where that could have happened. But it wasn't going to happen the way that these decisions were made because you didn't have buy-in across the board. And that starts, especially now, with Zach Kleiman, because it was Zach Kleiman who swung and missed on Marcus Smart after the, Draymond Green stuff didn't work out. What a different world we would live in if Draymond had actually gone to Memphis. Now it's on Zach Kleiman that he continues to bring in younger players like Molly talked about, drafting Edey, Jalen Wells, who I point out all the time 2 years ago was playing Division II basketball. Now he's tasked with defending the greatest point guard potentially in the history of the NBA. It's not rational. You have expectations up here on the screen. We, at least I won't speak for Molly, had the expectation that this was going to be a championship contending team. And I think that perspective is what has thrown off this season for a lot of Memphis people, because you expected something, but in the hindsight of looking back on it through the lens of Taylor Jenkins has been fired, that probably was never a realistic expectation, because you have too many young players, you have too many new coaches, and you have a GM who was trying to make it work with a coach that players liked, but didn't necessarily believe in that role as head coach anymore. And that, is a pretty messed up stew to have to deal with.
Yeah, and I think, I the reasonable expectations thing, I think, was, well, eventually we'll get into the record versus the good teams, but this kind of ties back into it as like the championship expectation. I agree with you that like Memphis fell short. The question is just like the Phoenix Suns had championship expectations, and they're way down there in hell. And like Memphis had championship expectations, and like, they came up short. They're the 4 seed, not good enough. Gonna have to make some changes. Probably gonna need to improve the roster. Like, need to get a better system to get the most out of Ja or move on. Like, short. They're short the same way I look at like the New York Knicks, where I'm like, yeah, no, good roster. You're not the Cavaliers. You're not the Knicks. They're gonna stomp you. Good team, good season. Not good enough, but you get together and you hope next year is that year when everything comes together for you. So, Molly, that's my thing, is I'm just like, this team wasn't bad. And that's been a thing I've heard pretty consistently, is like, this team's bad. And I agree that they've been bad in this stretch.
They're horrible.
But isn't it like a little bit of an overreaction to not be like, let's see if they can pull, like, what happens at the end of this season's story?
No, I don't think, like, of course it's an overreaction because we're sitting here, still in playoff contention, play-in now. But you have different expectations when your team has been at the top of the West for a while. I think that's fair. To talk about Zach Kleiman, because I do think our team is the issue. Our roster is the biggest issue. That doesn't mean that the coaching, because like I said, like, I've been on this coaching wave for a while. So this isn't like a new thing where I'm like, oh, I'll get rid of Taylor. If you just look at this season, it's a little different. But just looking at the last few years and what Zach Kleiman has done, I think his greatest strength, which is why so many people are high on him, including myself, I've praised his drafting, is his second round drafting, the way he's able to find these gems late in the draft that are really able to contribute to the team. But I also think that's his biggest weakness, because he, so many times, he's literally admitted to this, he invests in youth and forgets that you actually need some guys who have been there, who have been battle tested in order to contend. You can't just have a bunch of first year, second year players who maybe overachieved in a year. And the thing is, if you look at the last few years, we have added so many incredible pieces, but then you look at the trade deadlines, he's done nothing. He has yet to show that he can trade for anyone that is going to help the Grizzlies go to the next level. That's a huge issue. You look at this year, the deadline, we tried to get 2 guys from Brooklyn who I think would have been great extra pieces to add to a team that is 3 stars. You can talk about the superstar to star, but 3 stars, of course. And you need to add someone else that is just seasoned, that you can just have in there and be like, oh, okay, I wouldn't mind him taking a shot in the last couple minutes of a game. That's why the Grizzlies keep falling out of these games in the end, is because there's rosters that have, Looney can hit a corner 3. That's a guy we trust, right? It's like, oh, you have Jalen Wells in, a rookie, like we said, he's incredible, but it shortens the guys that can just go out and do it. And I feel like that's where Kleiman has really lost the plot. It's like, I think he gets too attached, and the fan base does too, to some of these guys where it's like, okay, well, maybe you can get rid of a Vince Williams, even though he was so great last year, in order to get, it's like, I don't think he's willing to make those tough decisions and to get rid of a guy he drafted that has shown to be better than maybe we thought. And I think that's why we're in the spot that we're in right now.
Yeah.
For me, that's Gigi Jackson. That's Gigi Jackson.
Yes.
The worst thing that could have happened was Gigi Jackson having that game where he gets compared to Kobe Bryant and LeBron James. You know who isn't Kobe Bryant and LeBron James? Gigi Jackson. He's not. I like Gigi, and I think that there's value in Gigi. I think he's going to be a good NBA player. That's 2 or 3 years away.
Yeah.
And you can't at the same time. The two timelines thing was a flawed premise to begin with. You can't say, oh, we're building towards something greater in the future.
Right.
This team's roster is not good enough in the here and now for that logic. You're not the Celtics, right? You're not the Warriors. You don't have 3 Hall of Fame players on your roster. You have to build things around it. And I think that's the biggest flaw of Kleiman, is he, not necessarily that he thinks he's smarter than everybody. He thinks that because he's such a good drafter, it can cover up some of the issues that he has and some of the mistakes that he makes. And, you know, he has egg on his face right now because his last play was to get rid of a coach that, while he wasn't helping, he was not the biggest part of the problem either.
Yeah.
I will, and again, I've been very critical. Like, I think Kleiman deserves criticism. I think the point about investing too much in your young guys, like this is happening all across the league right now. Them giving the ability for these GMs to sign second-round picks to guaranteed the contracts is a disaster, because you're basically daring these executives to be like, I found a diamond in the rough. You just wait and see. Oh no, I'm locked into a 3-year deal on a player that doesn't belong on an NBA court. To defend him, he got screwed pretty badly by the Nets. My understanding is, like, deals were goal line for both Dorian Finney-Smith and Cam Johnson, and the Nets just kept pushing. And then at one point, the DFS thing just, like, turned around and, like, whoop, nope, he's going to the Lakers. Just, like, my understanding is
funny how that happens. The Lakers just have good players fall into their lap all the time, it seems.
Funny how it happens, Joe. Good point. But yeah, like, I do genuinely kind of think that, like, to the point where this is not from a source in Memphis, but I did hear that there was a lot of, like, outward frustration known to everybody in the league that the Grizzlies were really pissed because they were like, we didn't even have a chance to counter offer on DFS. Like, we didn't even get a chance. Just like we've been working on this deal for weeks and months, and all of a sudden he's gone. And that was an opportunity. And then Cam Johnson obviously doesn't even get moved at the deadline.
Yeah.
So I think that there was, and maybe that move, like, shakes things up and reinvigorates the team. And maybe we're not here right now. Maybe it doesn't, and Taylor still gets fired. I still think that that's entirely possible. I do wind up just still being like, I think a lot of it for me is this big picture where I'm like, all right, you know, like Joe mentioned, they're 13th in defense last year with that MASH unit. They start off this year, they're top 5 in defense the vast majority of this season. And so when you go through a stretch like this that is so out of character, I do think this is an interesting question, is like, because Molly's point is like, it's not out of character. It's been coming. You just had to look for the signs, which is like, I didn't see it. And that's really interesting. But the other, like, my angle is, I get a broad history of success and, like, of the things that you want to see in a profile of a team that they've got. Like, I literally was like, Memphis is going to come out of this and they're going to be dangerous in the playoffs. And then instead it was just like, boo, and, like, spiraled out of control.
Mm-hmm.
I will ask this though, Molly, was Taylor put in a position to succeed with the decisions made in the assistant coaching staff this summer? Like, was he set up to succeed, or was he set up to fail with this coaching staff and this roster?
I think he was probably slightly more set up to fail. And again, you know, you talk about when I mentioned Kleiman buying it on youth, and you say like, oh, well, other teams are also doing that. Yeah, but the other teams, even when they have a great roster, they're still being aggressive. Like, the best example, of course, OKC has a million picks, and it's just an unfair situation. But, you know, they went and got Hardenstein. They went and got Caruso. Yeah. Sometimes you have to make those moves to just add guys, add veterans. Like, that is what this team is missing. I just think above all else, in terms of the Jenkins, and if he was set up to fail this season, maybe, like you said, I think they wanted to try something else. They brought in this guy who's now the head coach. Is he the answer? He could be, probably not. I just feel like it's been a combination of the leadership of this team has been failing its stars. And like when you look at, of course, there's also the health and, you know, the John Morant of it all. But like when you look at Ja, Jaren, Des, right now, this team, yeah, of course, Brandon's out. That's a really tough loss. But teams considering like one guy out for the season, that's not horrible, right? One guy who isn't one of your 3 stars. So you need to be figuring out how to make this, like this team should be great. You know what I mean? Like they should be great. And yeah, if you look at the numbers, like the Ja, Jaren, Des minutes aren't bad, but they just don't feel like they're clicking. It doesn't feel cohesive when you're watching it. It's not meshing the way that they should, because positionally, like these are 3 guys that should be complementing each other really well. And for me, at that point, it does have to just be pointed again to coaching. Like why are we not seeing more success with these lineups? Of course, players do deserve billion, but just stacked on top of it all, like it's clear that there needed to be a change. This team should be better when they're this healthy than they are, even though of course they have all these young guys, like they should. And
See, I'm at that point of like, well, look, okay, so the you know, you're like, it doesn't, the feeling matters. I don't think it doesn't matter. It's just very interesting because it's like, all right, what's the reality here? Because it's like, all right, let's look at big picture. The numbers with Ja, Des, Jaren, and Wells in particular are great. Like that's a really great 4-man combo with pretty much anybody.
Right.
All right, so that's good. And their overall profile is good, and they're winning games because they were like number 2 in the West at one point, right? And like the drop from 2 to 5 is not like this massive. That's not like 2 to 10. But the feeling does matter there. And so I think like that juxtaposition is important. Joe, I want to get your thoughts on if you think Taylor was set up to fail and the difference between how this team looked on paper versus how it felt watching it.
And it's also important to point out it's not 2 to 10 yet, right? I believe they are within a game of falling to 8 and being in the play-in tournament. And I don't want to speak for Molly again. Watching this team, I fully expect them to be in the play-in.
Oh, yeah.
I 100% think they're a play-in team now. And they'll probably lose the first game, and that'll be the great irony. They'll win the second one, the one that they should lose, the one that lots of Grizzlies people, if they're being honest, will say, come on, lose, so we can get this draft pick. Because I believe it's lottery protected, what we sent to Washington. I think that the biggest thing for this team is finding a direction and sticking with it, right? Because, again, the in-between of having youth and being a contender at the same time, the in-between of we like Taylor Jenkins, we think he's a good guy and a good coach, we just don't like how this is being executed, so we're going to give him almost an entirely new staff that he doesn't have a ton of input on. Oh, and by the way, we may or may not be hiring as your lead assistant someone that you're supposed to trust. We're hiring as your lead assistant someone who could very well be your replacement in season. Like Taylor Jenkins isn't a dumb person, right? And surely he looked at all of these things and went, those are interesting choices being made. So I think that there has to be, coming out of this, for Memphis to not be screwed, they have to make a decision and have a direction. If it's Isolo, great. Kudos to Isolo. He went with basically an 8-man rotation against the Warriors, right? And all those dudes played a ton of minutes. You had the starting 5, including Edey and the 4 names you mentioned earlier, plus essentially Luke Kennard, Scottie Pippen Jr., Santi Aldama, right? Those were the 8 dudes that played a vast majority of the minutes against the Warriors. Take out Luke Kennard because he's not going to be back. They're not going to pay him to come back. Cam Spencer probably is just sitting and waiting for him to be, ironically, going back to our prior conversation, unproven Cam Spencer is going to be the Luke Kennard replacement. But they probably look at it and say, we have 7 dudes that we think are going to be part of this. And then maybe G.G. Jackson, maybe Vince Williams Jr. can get right with a healthy offseason. But you need a coaching staff that is simpatico. And you need a GM who is going to hire a coach, whether it's Isolo or somebody else, that is going to allow for that coach to execute their vision within the scope of what the GM wants done. Because Robert Pera is essentially a ghost. I think I've seen him twice in 12 years, right? So this is Zach Kleiman's operation. He is being given plenty of freedom to do and execute as he sees fit. For this to work, he now has to nail this hire, allow for them to build a staff that they can believe in, and prioritize the players that they have on the roster. Because if they don't, and they don't build a scheme around those guys, then you're talking about trading away a Desmond Bane, a Ja Morant, a Jaren Jackson Jr. I don't think those things are necessary, but you followed the NBA long enough, Matt. You fire the coach, then the GM gets fired. The next level is usually blowing up the team. So we're at strike one. If you're a fan of the Memphis Grizzlies, you've swung and missed. Strike one has occurred of the Taylor Jenkins, Ja Morant, Zach Kleiman era. Strike two is going to be Kleiman. And if you are a fan of the Grizzlies and you want Ja Morant and Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. to succeed, you need to be fully invested in what this hiring process looks like. And it's not just handed over to somebody who, aside from Zach Edey looking like more of an NBA player, there hasn't been a ton of connection early on in the Eastlow era.
Two things before we get out of here. One, see, I'm actually of the opinion that I think probably one of the big three gets traded before Kleiman gets gone. I think the result of that trade is what winds up determining it. I'm also very concerned that, like, I love Dez. He's my favorite of this core. I love Dez deeply. It would be him, and I don't like that. It makes me very uncomfortable and sad to think about it. But it's also just like, look, if you move him for multiple components, you get more veteran versatility. Like, another team gets to be like, we believe in Desmond Bane that he can be a star player for us at number 2 versus a number 3 in Memphis. And then they send you multiple role players that you can then build around Jaren and Ja, and I guess Zach Edey. I've watched. There's a 2-hour video on Tomas Isalo teaching pick and roll defense at the Serbian Coaches Association camp last summer for Dusan. And I'm a sicko, so I watched this entire thing.
Wow.
And I was like, the scheme's really smart, man. I love it because it plays at the level and it's very aggressive. And Wells in particular, they're running it. And Wells is really good in it. This is what was frustrating me last night, because it's like Santi's actually doing a really great job in it. Like, he's doing exactly what you're supposed to do when you're guarding the bigs. Jaren's doing really good when he's supposed to be doing the guarding the bigs. Zach Edey was a plus 13 and played drop defense versus Steph Curry and got away with it. And I was so mad.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering when you're going to bring up those wonderful numbers that Zach Edey had.
If they're going to lose, can they lose because of the thing that's obviously going to kill them, which is Zach Edey playing drop coverage versus Steph Curry? But no, he got away with it. Can't keep getting away with it, Joe. But Molly, how screwed do you think Memphis is? Like, is there a way out of this? Like, you want the coach gone, so this is got to be like a positive step. And whether it's a solo, maybe it's a new coach this summer. Do you feel like, no, they're going to get this right back on track? They're not screwed.
Oh, I think we're definitely slightly screwed. That being said, hearing y'all talk about, is there a potential of trading one of the three? Of course, I mentioned Dez is the one you would trade. I think the Grizzlies have enough depth in terms of guys that a franchise might really like, and to get what they need to compete with those three guys. Like, I don't see a world where you need to trade any of them necessarily yet. But I will say this, like, because Ja Morant has just become this huge story in the national discourse, it's all, Ja didn't like the offense. Ja is doing this. Ja, now we're investigating for finger guns because, that's a real threat.
Whoa, Molly. Shh, you can't say finger guns on a podcast.
Yeah.
Now Silver's going to investigate you.
It was a terrifying sight for everyone at home seeing Ja, flash those finger guns. I'm still reeling from it. But you don't trade Ja. And this, I'm very big on this stance. I've been saying this to anyone I have Grizzlies conversations with. I don't care if you have concerns about the injuries right now. I don't care if you have concerns about if, again, he's able to stay on the floor, if he's able to be that guy to win you a championship. I would rather die with him. I'm so serious, unless, of course, you never know. He did something horrible, which he hasn't to this point. He has not done anything that I believe is worth being treated like a criminal the way he is. But I just think what he's done for the city, the way he's put the Grizzlies, on the map, the way he is so important to just the culture, the way he's so looked up to. He has the signature shoe that doesn't happen in Memphis. And he wants the Grizzlies to be a part of it. He's not just this guy that's a superstar and is doing his thing, but he's also playing on the Grizzlies. I would say a Zion who is great injured, but I don't think New Orleans is just a huge part of who he is. I don't think he's constantly Nola, I want to be here forever, which he doesn't have to be. And I'm not saying that means he doesn't want to be in New Orleans forever. But with Ja, he's been so big and so loving Memphis. And he's so phenomenal. I mean, I've never experienced the joy I have gotten from watching Ja play basketball at the highs before all of this madness. Sorry, I don't know if y'all hear the sirens, but I don't like
Adam Silver coming for Ja, actually.
Oh yeah, the cops have been called.
Yeah, they heard me talking about the finger guns, but no, I think that the Luka trade like broke people's brains, and obviously Ja is not at the same level as Luka. However, I don't want that to happen, and even if it might be a smart move, which I don't think it is, I don't think that should happen and will happen.
Yeah, the way this has been portrayed has been frustrating for me because it's, well, Ja was unhappy with the offense. Yeah, because they put a guy that didn't want to run pick and roll in charge. Taylor Jenkins didn't do that, but somehow, and I will say, Kleiman tried really hard to reject that narrative, but enough people in the organization talked about Ja being unhappy, or people around Ja talked about being unhappy enough to present the idea, which tags Ja with Taylor getting fired, which I don't think he wanted.
No,
I think he was like, can we run some pick and rolls, please? And that's very different from, we got to get this guy out of here. It's just very different.
Yeah.
And that difference, I think, is unfortunate. We're out of time, but I thought this was great. And you're lovely people, and it's very hard for me to get mad at you. But I will say, I still believe in Taylor Jenkins, and you guys have said, like, I think he's a good coach. I think he could have gotten it done with this team. I think it would have been more gratifying. We'll see what happens from here on out, but I think it's a fascinating conversation. Joe Mullinax, Locked On Grizzlies, Molly Morrison, Bleacher Report. Thanks for joining me on Daggers. We'll see you guys again next time.